to make a meaningful and effective comparison between various media in the arts, it's important to have a structural process, something you can rely on each time you go to compare things across genres. How do you compare a piece of music versus a work of art, visual art? How do you compare a poem compared to a sculpture? What do you do? What do you say? How do you do it? They're not the same thing. I have a list. So here are the steps that you can use each time you're going to compare two or more works in the arts. First, starting with each work separately, you would start with this. You need to be able to articulate what the structural elements are for each art or each medium. We're going to learn the words, the appropriate terms, for music, visual art, and literature in modules 2, 3, and 4. And you'll have plenty of chance to practice pulling out the structural elements for each of those media. When you're examining your actual works of art, of the arts, use those structural elements as the basis of your comparison. The next thing that you would need to do to make an effective comparison would be to put each example into its historical context. When was the example created, and what was going on in the world at that time? This might be what was going on in the entire world, but it might be what was going on in this locality at that time. What are the historical events? What are the political events and tendencies? What were the cultural and sociological tendencies of the people that would have viewed or heard or seen or read this work of art? You might also consider, what is the context of the creator of this work of art? Is this work a departure from all of the other pieces that the creator made? Or is this typical? Is this the kind of thing that this particular person usually created? Those are all important elements, but there are more. Now you become more specific. Looking at each example, you should describe how it's constructed. Here's where you're going to use those structural elements. This is perhaps the most challenging task in the comparative process, because first you have to look not at what it's about, but how is it made? What's the melody like in a piece of music? What's the harmony? What's the rhythm? What are all these things used to produce this particular piece of music? If I'm looking at a visual work, what is its shape? What is its color? Where is my gaze directed on the canvas? All of these structural elements are important, as well as what is the subject of this particular work of art. Once you've identified the subject of the work of art, what it's ostensibly about, you can then try and extrapolate what the creator is trying to express. What's the creator's goal in this piece? Is it to simply describe something? To present you with a picture of an apple? Or is it meant to suggest that this particular apple is really juicy? Or perhaps somehow the creator, in presenting this work of art, might suggest that apples aren't as good for you as you thought they were. All of these things are possible. They may not be provable. It's very difficult to prove these kinds of things. If I say, oh, Mozart absolutely meant that this symphony should portray the joys of living in Vienna, I can't really prove it because Mozart's not here and I can't ask him. But I could extrapolate from the structural elements and how they're used. Hey, I think Mozart's writing this symphony to show us all how great Vienna is, and don't you wish you lived here? That's possible. The next one is to note your own reflection. What do you observe? What do you think? What do you feel? Even, what does this piece remind you of, and where do your thoughts go from there? It may seem strange, especially in a college course, to ask you what you think or what you feel based on a work in the arts. But as a matter of fact, this is integral to the humanities, and it's one of the reasons we keep coming back to the humanities, because it puts us in touch with us as humans, with our responses and reflections to the things around us. So it's all right to note your reactions and your reflections. You have to go below the surface. You can't just stop and say, well, I hate this. Why? Why do you hate it? Why do you love it? Did it remind you of something? Have you seen this before? Have you seen something like it before? This is your chance to allow intellectual and emotional curiosity to take over. Finally, you're at the last step. You need to compare all of the works that you've now examined separately. Comparisons work best when you can find, especially when you're using works, that have common and disparate elements. If two works have completely different elements and there's nothing in common between them, well, that comparison's not going to be very helpful, and there's not going to be very many interesting connections between pieces. However, if there are some commonalities, then you can make use of those and play off the differences between the works of art. Sometimes the differences will be because they're in different medium. Sometimes the differences are because the creators of the works are trying to express different things. Sometimes it's simply in the point of view or the historical period. 2 different time periods, 2 different points of view. That's what we're after. We're trying to get you to come to that level of analysis and comparison.